Hi, Michaela.
Hello.
Today I'm going to pose to you some more listener questions that came through Instagram. We made a post that sort of shout out for questions, and we got quite a few actually. So let's start with those. So the first one is, can age gap relationships work? And this particular question is saying where the woman is older, 15 years plus.
That's a good one to start out with. Can age gap relationships work? Yes, of course they can. Anything can work. There's a few considerations there. And of course, the first thing to be said is men have done it for millennia, right? It's completely normal and considered okay for a 15-year age gap between a man and a woman. And, bigger ones. We all know people who had bigger age gaps. And of course, why that's always been considered okay is that it's considered that, young, viable, beautiful women are essentially enticing to older men who have power and status and worldliness. And so always been considered okay in the eyes of people. But of course, when we then turn it around and we look at an older woman with a younger man, there's a lot of sneering and, he must be a boy toy, or she must be giving him money, or, things of that nature. And that's, of course, not always true. Mostly it's not true these days, but there is a bit more of a stigma around that, which is probably why this question comes up. And of course, there are some considerations that have to do with things like biology. It wouldn't work, let's say, if the man in question wants children, several maybe, and the woman in question is on the edge of childbearing age or even older than that. So that would be a restriction for the relationship, obviously. I mean, that can also be handled in different ways. I know a woman right now, she's 52, she's having a baby with her younger husband with a surrogate. So it's doable, but it's not kind of the easy, regular form of relationship if you want to have children within that age gap. Now, of course, that age gap's not a problem if somebody's 20 and somebody's 35, so to speak. But then you have other issues which have to do with maturity. So, of course, consider it. This is one of those, big sweeping statement considerations that women tend to mature a bit faster than men in the 20s. And hence, it's probably not very exciting to be 35 and have a 20-year-old boyfriend. But it's certainly really nice if you're, let's say, in your mid-40s and you're with somebody who is in their 30s, because, and this is where things have changed, I think, quite substantially, most women in their 40s and 50s and 60s are super vital and alive and vibrant, and they found their place in the world, and they have some experience, and they've done the things they needed to do in their younger years, and now they're actually happy to have an adventure and go and travel and maybe even explore new things sexually and be challenged in a different way. And a lot of men of that same age group or older are on a different page. They want different things. So more and more, we actually see that that's quite a nice combo to have a woman who's settled herself. She also kind of knows what she likes and doesn't like. She's probably not quite as jealous or reacted around certain things. And a man who's kind of in his prime and enjoys being with somebody who is a bit more relaxed, but also probably has some emotional resource and things of that nature, or even financial resource, where she's not dependent on him making things happen. So that all said, I think it can totally work. I think it's just, as always, super important that purpose of relationship lines up. We talk about that a lot. So if purpose of relationship doesn't line up, then that's not a good call. And then the other thing, of course, is, do you really even want a long-term relationship, or do you just want to have kind of a rebound situation or of fun or a lighter relationship where you don't live together, but you travel, you have a good time, you don't see that much of each other. So those are of course, in the purpose of relationship, things to consider. But can it work totally? I also think it's really about time that we kind of destigmatize that whole idea, because things have really changed for people in relationship, and also for women in their bodies, and how, we feel ourselves in our 40s, 50s, and 60s and beyond.
Oh, very interesting. We have a question here from Kitty. How to navigate jealousy from partners about opposite sex friends?
Well, this is one of those questions where I would have to know a bit more from Kitty about why is the partner jealous, right? Because there's a wide range of things that could actually happen. One of which is the partner had, let's say, bad experiences in a previous relationship. That's one, right? Where there was infidelity or there was behavior that caused some kind of disruption or pain or hurt or mistrust in the previous relationship. Could also be that the partner and Kitty had some previous experiences where things just didn't go so well, and the partner doesn't feel secure and stable in the trust and in the connection. So that's an option. Then, of course, there is the option that it has nothing to do with any of that, and it's just a possessive partner. And then there could also be the option where there's some behavior that's not necessarily cheating, but that's a bit extra flirty or leaky, so to speak, meaning there's some snacking going on that the partner doesn't want to experience because it feels diminishing to the relationship, or there's an insecurity. So all of those are options. And of course, there's different answers for different options. So I would say to Kitty, the first thing to look at is where is it coming from? Is there an actual issue? Meaning, are you deeply involved with somebody in a way that your partner doesn't understand, either because your partner doesn't have a reference point, or it's out of the ordinary, or there's some kind of old patterns either within the relationship or before at play? So that's the first thing to consider. Then the next thing from there is to actually ask the partner, what is it exactly that feels off? And what is it exactly that causes the jealousy? Now, of course, if it's something like, well, I just don't like it, I don't want you to be with any other man outside of myself, well, that's something to consider, perhaps away from the partner, as in, is that reasonable behavior, right? Is the request a reasonable request, or is it a request that's a bit either possessive or overly dominant or based on some previous trauma? Then you might have to get some help and set some boundaries with your partner around that also allow your partner to explore that for themselves, outside of the relationship. But if it's kind of determined that it's in some kind of a murky area where your partner perhaps doesn't know what you're doing away from you, or perhaps you enjoy a bit of flirting, or perhaps you enjoy getting dressed up in a certain way and going out with certain friends in a way that your partner doesn't understand, that's often a complaint, right? Well, you don't get dressed up for me, but when you go out with whomever, you're all excited and you get dressed up and you seem to have a much better time. When it's you and me, it's sweatpants and on the sofa, right? That's what they would ask or would say when you ask them. So there's a lot in there, and it's not always all bad. Like I said, if it's some kind of, possessive stuff, that's a different thing. But if your partner genuinely feels that there's something lacking between the two of you that's happening with regular male friends, that's something to look at. Maybe there's some improvement that can be made that deepens the relationship, or there's some actual complaint. And maybe there's also some way to explain to your partner why it's important to you to go out with your friends, and what that does to you or for you, and how that contributes to a positive relationship with the partner. So there's a lot in there, but unfortunately, I don't know any of the details, so I can't go deeper into, the specifics.
Thank you. Okay, so a question here: how to deal with the desire for freedom and exploration outside of a monogamous relationship?
Well, I think the first thing to say there is, I think it's pretty normal, right, to have desire for freedom and exploration outside of a relationship, because no one relationship, regardless of how good it is, will fulfill all or tick all the boxes, right? That's just not possible in these super multi-layered, multifaceted lives we live these days, and also in what's available to us, right? We see a lot more. It didn't used to be that we had access to all the information that might want us to have that kind of adventurous life, so to speak. Now we do. So the question there is, and this is the most important question, is that desire for adventure and exploration of a sexual nature, or let's say of an erotic nature, however you want to define that, or not, right? Because there's all kinds of different ways to look at it. Since the questioner says in outside of a monogamous relationship, I'm assuming it relates to things of the erotic nature. And so, of course, within that, there's a big consideration, and that is, if you have chosen monogamy and you have both agreed to monogamy, anything that you explore outside of that is considered cheating and infidelity and breaks the trust, right? So, and the question is, are you willing to endanger the relationship and also endanger your internal integrity and the way you feel about yourself for a bit exploration and adventure? And that's the first question is, do you really want to do that? And if you really do want to do that, do you want to do that in a way that it endangers the relationship, meaning you break the agreements? If the answer to that is no, right? And some people sometimes feel, well, what my partner doesn't know isn't going to bother them, and I just want to have a moment to explore, and then I'll decide if I want to open that topic and discuss it further. That's not necessarily an incredibly bad idea, with the big caveat that, of course, if you do that, it opens an enormous can of worms, and it creates internal and external friction that's probably not worth it, right? Because also, most people are not really that good at concealing those things. And here's why. And I want to just say that quickly if people choose to not involve their partner in the, let's say, first exploration. The problem with it is, of course, when you want adventure and a bit of excitement outside of your relationship, it's exactly that, adventure and excitement outside the relationship. Your partner will notice. There's no way your partner is noticing something, because you are suddenly much more adventurous and much more excited, and you're probably distracted. You're probably checking your phone a little bit more than you usually would, or you're behaving differently than you usually would. And there's a taking away from the relationship, an energetic taking away from the relationship to feed that exploration, right? So that's one of the things that most people do. That's a real problem. And that's what then causes the issue. Now, there is a school of thought, not everybody subscribes to that, but there's a school of thought that when you do have a bit of adventure and relationship, when you have that, you can bring that back into the relationship and enliven the relationship. And that can definitely be true. However, most people in acquiring that adventure and relationship kind of zap energy from the relationship to begin with. Maybe they'll bring it back, but maybe they just take it all to where it's exciting and new and shiny. and it actually depletes something. So that's a real consideration if you decide to do this on the sly. I wouldn't suggest doing it on the sly, simply because it erodes all kinds of internal and external fabrics. So if you do want to do it, then you have a few options. You can involve your partner by saying, look, I really want to explore certain things. This is super important to me. What are the perimeters of, that engagement? That's one way to go, right? That's a fairly adult and fairly difficult conversation to have, but probably not a bad one. The other option is to see if you can explore in the realm where you feel you have something that you want to explore without breaking the agreements of the relationship. So that's another option, meaning you don't actually have sex with other people, or you don't actually, whatever that is, right? And you stay within whatever the agreements of your monogamous relationships are, meaning maybe you have some friends that you have a bit of a flirtation with, but you're not going beyond that point. Or maybe you go on a vacation with some girlfriends and you allow yourself to feel what it's like to be somewhere else and be looked at as a single person, or, there's all kinds of ways that you could do it without breaking the container of the relationship. But of course, that's also pretty hard, because when it is very exciting and very new, typically people break their boundaries much easier, particularly if it's on a vacation, it's in another zip code, so to speak, or there's some alcohol involved, or it's a party, or you're with people who are very loose with those agreements, then there might even be a bit of peer pressure. So it's a murky field, but it certainly can be done. If you have really good boundaries, you could play within the boundaries of the monogamy, but see what that's like. But in an ideal world, it's probably a good idea to sit with your partner and say, look, I have these niggling things and itches and stuff that I want to explore. I love you. I don't want to ruin the relationship. But what are some options? And there's a fairly good chance probably that your partner also has some of that. And then if nothing else, you can talk about it. You might still decide not to do it, or you might decide to explore both and then come to some kind of conclusion, or you might set a certain boundary. I have some friends here in town. They have you can flirt and, kind of kiss, but you can't go any further. And it can't be anywhere near the existing circle of friends. And, there's all these things that they have so that they can explore. And then I have another set of acquaintances. They have you can do whatever you want once a year at the trip to Mexico, right? Seems to work for them, but they have an established, really positive and good relationship, which is the last thing I want to say, right? That need for adventure could be, just normal human development and desire for newness, but it could also be the sign that something's really not good in the relationship. So once again, super nuanced, and we don't know what it is, but here are some options.
And how might one tell if that desire is coming from, as you say, wanting to spice things up and explore new things, but in an otherwise stable relationship, and it's perhaps coming from a place where it's a sign maybe that the relationship is itself not really working? How might one begin to parse that?
I think one of the telltale signs is how much complaint do you have. Right. So meaning if you kind of feel, or even maybe you have some people with whom you talk about your relationship. Some people do that, some people don't, but could be a therapist or a good friend, or even in your journal or in your internal, thought process. If there's a lot of complaint about certain aspects of the relationship, it's probably a sign that there's something amiss. But when it's that kind of normal feeling of wanting something new while feeling quite good otherwise, the same kind of new that you have when you want to go to a new restaurant ever so often, or you want to go and travel, or you want to experience something new on the weekend, and that experiencing something new on the weekend, going a different restaurant or something isn't like, oh my God, every weekend we go to the same restaurant. But it's more let's go somewhere else. We've been there so many times. I want to see something new. That would be in the normal range of wanting newness and wanting new behaviors. And some people tend towards more of that. They get bored very easily, and some people they like pizza for dinner every evening, so to speak.
Some people, when they're getting into a monogamous relationship or talking about the patterns of their relationships, raise the concern, what if I'm just not built for that? They'll say that, could I ever become monogamous? One does hear that, actually. Maybe I'm not built for it, or something like that. And sometimes I have seen people go to great lengths to attempt to become monogamous. They hold it as an ideal. Of course, you're not holding it as necessarily as an ideal. It's one good way of doing it, but there are good relationships that are monogamous and bad relationships that are monogamous. But nonetheless, I have seen people really attempt to rein in an urge to be non-monogamous, I suppose, in the name of monogamy. I wonder what you think of that. Is that a good thing? Is that a virtuous thing? Is that going against one's nature? Is it maybe a combination of both? What do you think of that sort of a situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's reasons to be monogamous, right? Practical reasons, so to speak, to be monogamous. And practical, I mean, not only just one household, one set of partners, one bank account kind of practical reasons, but also practical reasons as in how much distraction or drama or, outside influences you want to have and everything that comes with it. There's also real kind of pair bonding. It's the two of us against the world. We're raising our children together without outside gene pools interfering kind of thing, right? There is that as well, which can be super valuable and quite sweet. But and some people are just built like that. But then there's a lot of people who are not built like that. And in general, the thing to look at, and there's a lot of therapists, as you well know, because we sometimes see that in our work together with people, there's a lot of therapists who hold people committing to monogamy and getting out of that urge or need or desire for multiplicity and adventure and excitement as kind of a maturing and calming down. And they see people as faulty or deficient or fucked up by their parents or whatever, right? When people don't want to be monogamous. And like you said, I don't think that that's true. I think that different people have totally different needs in the way that they give their, to say that cliche, right? They give their gifts to the world, meaning giving the thing that they're about into a great context. And for some people, particularly more, not always, but often on the artistic end of things, right? Who are wildly creative in some field. They could be creative in business, but they could also be actually artists. But for people who are very creative, they need a lot of new and a lot of different input and a lot of different engagement. And that doesn't stop in the relational domain. That goes in every domain, for instance. And so to say to every human, well, your need for multiplicity is just a dysfunction and you'll mature and deepen into one relationship, I think is a bit reductionist. And also, it's just morally, it's grounded in some kind of moral belief. I think there is people who are just not built like that. And I think the only thing to know is that if you're that kind of a person, Well, I should say this. How do you know if you're that kind of a person? Well, if your many attempts at kind of praying the need for several relationships away, therapy, forcing yourself, all of that still hasn't worked. You might want to consider that you're not built like that, right? But it is also important to look at, is your need for all these multiple inputs a way to kind of stay on the surface of things, because you don't want to have a deeper commitment. But here's the thing, not everybody needs to make this deep commitment. I mean, why, right? We've fought so long and hard, and we're nowhere near people being able to actually understand themselves and do the things that are actually not only best for themselves, which is a bit reductionist, but for their greater community and for their offering into that greater community. So you could, in fact, say, I'm just not built like that, I'm not going to do it. Then the question is just, can you still have a relationship or relationships in a way that doesn't cause mayhem and destruction and pain and suffering from everyone you meet, right? And there is people who have managed to do that, and there's people who have failed to do that, and they eventually go, well, I'll give up, so it's a very difficult thing. And some people have made a lifestyle out of it, right? There's like whole polyamory movements where people have all decided that's what they were going to do, and they're going to work that out, and they're going to use that as a tool to find out why they want that. Well, it's one of many ways to kind of look at it. However you want to work it out, though, you want to be putting yourself and the people you are interacting with to the least amount of, like beating yourself up and being down on yourself and shame and blame and drama and stuff like that. And how you typically do that is you clarify who you are, and then you lay that out very clearly and say, this is how I'm built, this is how it goes, this is what I'm available for, this is what I'm not available for. And then hopefully you find people who are willing to explore with you in that domain.
Mm-hmm, very interesting indeed. In a future episode, we're actually going to, you and I, discuss what we've been reading. And in fact, that was one of the questions here. Someone said here, has asked you, what have you been reading, listening to? They've just finished your book, and what should they read next? Of course, the answer is you should read the book again. And this time underline things. But, sometimes if you want to read another book, okay, I guess that's all right. And so we're actually going to talk about that. We're going to have a discussion about some of the things that you've been reading, and I'll bring for some things that I've been reading as well. And one of those books that I'd planned to raise with you, and this might make an interesting episode in itself, hearing you discuss this theme or muse on this theme. I'll just mention it here as something of a teaser. It's a book called Solitude by Anthony Storr. And very interesting book. He makes the case early in the book that it's long been a trend in, say, psychology, counseling, therapy, etc. There's long been a trend to consider a monogamous, or at least, let's say, intimate relationship of some sort, or a relationship in general, actually, as both the metric and the expression of healthy psychology. So that one's ability to be in a relationship and is, one having a relationship is in fact the evidence of healthy psychology. In other words, it's the ideal, and that not having a relationship, say, on being single or something like this, or deriving satisfaction from other avenues, such as one's work, for example, or other meaningful activities, is somehow aberrant. Quite interesting indeed. And so there's that assumption, and he discusses that assumption, and in his book Solitude, he's making the case, and he uses geniuses of various types, of the past, and he said, well, this great poet had very dysfunctional relationships, or this composer, it seems, didn't have much in the way of relationships, or detailing the relationship life of certain great figures who explicitly stated in their writing, for example, that really they derive their satisfaction in their work and what they're doing in the world. So I think that's quite interesting. And so he proposes that maybe there are two possible means of fulfillment, at least. Certainly, he was advocating for sort of broadening in the book, if I've read him correctly, of the range there, and saying, well, you can also have fulfillment in other things than relationship. And what if that was the case?
Yeah.
Interesting indeed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true, that, that gold standard of you're essentially only not fucked up if you have a relationship is blatantly wrong. I mean, and I can say that having been a relationship counselor for many, many years, a lot of people who come in with their relationships, granted, I only see the sick relationships, right? Not only, but who come in would be way better off not being in that relationship, right? For a number of reasons, but they're so dead set on making that one work that they might spend 10 years in therapy, being quite unhappy, having all kinds of stuff happen. And then at the end, they go, whoa, I should have left 10 years ago, right? But I think that going away from insisting that being in a relationship is the gold standard for mental health and is or emotional health is very, very important, because it leaves an opening to say, well, yeah, maybe I do want to be in relationship, but maybe relationship model the way that I'm aspiring in it, or maybe I don't want to be in that kind of relationship. And it gives, rise to a whole consideration around when is it time to break up, which the answer typically is way earlier than you want to, or way later than you think, meaning, there's some people who cut and run immediately, and then there's some people who stick around for way longer than they should. But that entire area isn't really explored because it's such a stigma to break up, or to have been broken up with, or being divorced, or actually not having a partner and being okay with it. You're still a spinster as a woman. As a man, you're just a, playboy about town or something, which is also sometimes not looked at as something good. And there are other options, and they are not explored. And I think, it's been made okay for people to kind of abdicate all relationship and go in the monastery, so to speak, in whatever tradition, that is kind of looked at as like, oh, they're seeking God. But what about just, not wanting to go that deep in on the relationship level, but wanting to give all that attention to a cause or your work or an art? I think that's totally an option. And I think opening that discussion wider is also, I think, a relief for some people, because I sometimes have people come to me and they think they should be doing something in that domain that when you really, really start questioning them, they don't want. And when they finally can say, I actually don't want that. I had that. I don't want that again. Or I had that and it was good, but now I want something else. Or, you know what? I never wanted that. And my last 3 relationships were a disaster because I actually didn't want that. There's a huge relief in that.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. One of the counseling or psychological theories that one can see this happening, this idea of relationship as both the metric and the expression, and indeed the evidence of psychological health, is attachment theory. Yes, the assumption that, well, the only reason you're not in a relationship is because you have some sort of dysfunctional attachment style. And if we could heal that, then you would automatically, naturally want to be in a relationship. And that might be true, it seems you're saying, for some people, that healing of a dysfunctional attachment style will enable them to be in the kind of relationship that they'd like to be in. But for some people, you're saying it's not an attachment style problem necessarily. They just want different things. They have different priorities and different interests. That's, very interesting indeed.
Yeah, also there's different phases of life, right? You might want it at some point and then not want it anymore, and then it again, or have had it and not want it again. A friend here in town, she had 2 very successful long-term marriages, marriage and relationship, and she just doesn't want to do it anymore. She just doesn't want to do it anymore. She wants something different with her life. And that's not to say that she hasn't moments of loneliness, for that kind of depth of, hanging with somebody on the sofa, whatever, that the best part of real companionship or the best part of really good sexual relationship. But she says it's a small price to pay for the amount of sovereignty and freedom and self-expression and self-exploration she has now in her later years as a single woman. I think that's entirely commendable if it comes from a place of deliberate choice and not from some bitter abdication based on not seeing options, right?
One does hear another view, which perhaps I'll put to you now, which is that actually life is not all about chasing one's own, should we say, satisfaction or ideals or preferences or wishes, and that actually a great deal of satisfaction and contentment and meaning can be derived from relationships in which involves some sort of sacrifice on your part. I mean, a classic example that people will say is, well, having a family, having kids, yes, it restricts my personal freedom, but I'm part of something now. I'm part of a family. It's a relief, actually, in some ways, to have something other than myself to fight for and to orient towards. And so some people will say that there's something in that that's quite meaningful, and that simply following whatever one might like, well, I'd like to be single, I'd like to focus on this, I'd like to focus on that. That's one way of going. But another way of going is to really invest in, say, a family unit, a family situation, and to find some satisfaction and meaning in that, in those sorts of relationships. Some people will even go so far as to say is that's the best thing to do. That's the ideal. But you hear from certain viewpoints, well, that's what people have always done. That's what you should do. It's important. You shouldn't just chase your own whims and fancies. You should get serious, settle down, this sort of thing. And it seems certainly that people do find tremendous satisfaction, or can find tremendous satisfaction in that kind of a scenario as well. So what do you make of that kind of a view?
Well, I think that's definitely true, right? I definitely believe personally that being of service, and not taking yourself so serious and not making it all about me is hugely relieving, number one, right, for your own system, but it's also really, in a way, what we're built for, and where a lot of love and satisfaction and fulfillment comes from. I mean, hands down. But for me, in the way I look at it when I work with people, when we work with people, when we teach, is that I always say this to my clients: you can't renounce something you've never had, right? And that renunciation of something you've never had is something that people often do when they can't achieve it, right? It's like, I don't need money. Money is evil. Money is the root of all evil, or whatever people say, but they've never actually managed to make money, right? So if you abdicate something that you've actually not achieved, you're always going to have that niggling feeling of having martyred yourself, or having just reduced that part of yourself because you couldn't actually do it. While when you have figured out who you are as a human, at least in some way, right, then your service isn't martyrdom, it's actual gifts and offerings and service, right? And there's a fine distinction there, because there is people who just martyr themselves because they haven't learned how to stand up for themselves, set proper boundaries, know their likes and dislikes. So their choice of that doesn't come from a place of freedom. It comes from a place of scarcity. It's not an abundant, I'm just not going to take myself that seriously. And I'm also not going to care that much for my body right now because I'm raising an infant, right? Or things like that. That's a very beautiful thing. But if you constantly go, oh my God, what about me? There's nothing left of me. And you have this internal dialogue of suffering around your abdication, so to speak, that's not good for anyone, not for you and not for the person you serve. It's not to say that you don't have a complaint ever so often, but the prevailing feeling of being given should be that you give yourself freely and joyfully, and that you have great, there's energy coming from your giving, and not a constant need to deplete yourself or suppress your real needs or suppress your real feelings for the good of all other people. And that's just something to consider. Now, sometimes we don't have a choice how it goes, but when we do have a choice, it's nice to give from a place of abundance and not from a place of depletion and scarcity and lack and not being able to do it.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. Perhaps one more question then, related to this theme, before we close. Another skip in the record that people often express, or objection or concern that people express in this area, is they look at, say, divorce. You see it, popular examples of relationship breakdowns and divorce, in the news, acrimonious splits and so on. But also, who doesn't know somebody who's been through divorce? Well, many of us do, and many times those divorces can be quite devastating for one or both parties, financially, emotionally, etc. There could be all sorts of complications there. So I have heard the view expressed that the fear of that is actually a strong motivator in avoiding relationship. Gosh, I look around at what I've seen happen to some people in when their relationships have ended. They've had some divorce or something like this, and it's been terrible for them. I don't want anything to do with that, and it puts some people off getting into a relationship at all, or going beyond a certain point in relationship. That's something that one hears actually more and more. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, like you said, we all know people who've been absolutely devastated by their divorces, right? Emotionally, to the point of near suicide, the children, custody battles, people not being able to make a living because their alimony is so high, people not being able to make, any ends meet because their alimonies are so low. I mean, you name it, it's insane, right? And I think that's a real concern, as something to look at when you look at the construct of your relationship, right? It's not to say that if you don't get married and you have a breakup, it's not also very painful, but it's painful without the legal situation, right? Which could be good or bad depending on where you sit. But the thing is, and this brings us back to what you and I have talked about plenty in other podcasts and courses and workshops and online courses, you have to have proper purpose of relationship conversations before you go deep in, right? You just have to. And I know people don't want to do that because it destroys their fairy tale illusion of how it is. And there's a lot of people, when you say to them, just had this conversation yesterday with somebody, and it was like, oh, we're getting married. And I said, congratulations, that's amazing. When? What are you going to do? Oh, wow, blah, blah, blah. Are you going to have a prenup? Oh, no. Oh, no, no, no. No, that's admitting defeat from the beginning. And that's such a bizarre kind of indoctrinated fairy tale, thing. There's another word I was going to use, but I'm not going to curse, because it's the exact opposite. A good prenup, meaning sitting down and making an agreement between two people who love each other, right? When you want to get married, you love each other as much as hopefully you have so far, right? This can also grow and deepen, of course, over time. But when two people who love each other sit down and go, okay, let's make an agreement. So when we are married, we both feel that we're married for the right reasons. We don't stay together because we are worried about the kids or the house or the dogs or whatever. Let's hash this out beforehand. And then let that be kind of the safeguard against us making bad relationship choices based on considerations that have nothing to do with our intimacy, our love, our dedication to each other. Because there's lots of people who stay together for financial reasons, and they kind of muddle along and are, deeply unhappy and resentful or whatever, right? So when you then sit down and make that prenup, that will bring up the issues that actually need to be addressed, right? All that niggling stuff that nobody wants to talk about because, oh no, we are not going to be those people. Guess what? You will be those people. When push comes to shove, it's going to be, I just heard this week as well. I had a week of, breakups and things like that I heard about, where one person said to the other, these dogs are mine, and once I get them, I have them, I'm going to drop them off at the pound and have them killed. So, and this is how people feel about their children. I mean, not dropping them off at the pound, but as tools of injury and leverage, right? You want to hash this stuff out long before you get to that kind of point in a relationship where you're threatening horrible things to, harmless and innocent creatures of human and canine worlds, right? So sitting down, making that agreement is hugely clarifying for the relationship. And when people do it and they do it well, it actually relieves a lot of that stuff, and they actually talk about things, and I know it's not romantic. I know it's not popular, but it makes a huge difference, and it will save you an enormous amount of relationship counseling later on if you do this at the beginning. And, funny enough, and I'm not saying this to support certain not so good parts about organized religion, but it used to be that when you would go and get married, you'd have to have premarital counseling by your priest or whatever, right? And of course, the question is, what does a priest know, a celibate priest know about marriage? Nothing, but the questions asked at least highlighted some of the potential rubs, highlighted the potential conflicts in the situation. What? You don't want children? Some people didn't know that till they actually sat down in premarital counseling. So I'm not saying a priest needs to do it. I think it should be somebody qualified, ideally with lots of experience in the field that you want counsel on. But doing that version of premarital counseling together with a good prenup, I think, will alleviate that. And then the other option, of course, is you just don't get married. You do all the things you enjoy about relationship, but you just don't do the legal thing, which, there's like kind of the spiritual covenant, so to speak, which is one thing. And then there's the legal thing, which is a totally different thing. So nowadays, where we're no longer bound by these conventions quite as much, some parts of the world, I want to say, maybe there's some other options around that as well.
Well, thank you very much, Michaela. Fascinating discussion today. And perhaps I'll take this opportunity to remind people that you can find out more about Michaela and the work we're doing at michaelaboehm.com. There you can find all our latest live events, online courses, even self-paced courses and downloads and things that you can investigate and explore. So that's www.michaelaboehm.com.
On that note, I think it might be good to mention we do have 2 on-demand downloadable courses, one of which is all the questions you should ask yourself to prep for a relationship or within a relationship. So it's this entire long, it's kind of a toolkit, it's this course where, or questions essentially, that you can sit down and write or discuss with a friend or discuss with a therapist, that kind of excavate your relationship styles and your needs in relationship and the purpose of the relationship. So that's available. It's on demand. It's in the online course section. And then, of course, we have the relationship course as a whole instruction on how to discuss the purpose of the relationship with prompts and everything as well. So just as support material.
Great. That's michaelaboehm.com. Michaela, thank you very much.
Thank you.